What happens when a normally calm, composed Hollywood star suddenly hits her breaking point on live television, and no one at the table sees it coming? Make sure to subscribe to Final Take Files, and like and comment for more talk show coverage. So Natalie, let me just start here, the host says with a polite smile, leaning slightly forward over the table, cue cards in hand. You've been in the spotlight for so long, and people often describe you as very thoughtful, very measured. But lately there's been a lot of discussion online about celebrities speaking out on social issues. Do you feel pressure to say the right thing all the time? Natalie smiles, but it's tight, barely there. I think there's always pressure, she replies calmly. Not just for people in the public eye, but for anyone who has a platform. You want to be responsible with it. Another host jumps in quickly, nodding. But do you think sometimes celebrities overstep? I mean, some viewers feel like, just entertain us. There's a light murmur from the audience, some agreement, some hesitation. Natalie tilts her head slightly. I think that's a fair question, she says. But I also think it assumes people are only one thing. Like, you can be an actor and also care about the world around you. Sure, the first host says, but there's a difference between caring and, let's say, lecturing, right? A couple of audience members clap softly. Natalie's smile fades just a fraction. I don't think speaking about issues is lecturing, she says, still composed. It's participating in society. Well, another host cuts in. Some people would argue that when you have millions of followers, it carries a different weight. It's not just participation anymore, it's influence. Exactly, the first host adds. And influence can be dangerous if it's not informed. Natalie blinks slowly, clearly choosing her words. I agree that being informed is important, she says. But I don't think that standard is applied equally. Everyone has opinions, some just have bigger microphones. The audience gives a small, mixed reaction, some claps, some silence. The second host leans back slightly, crossing her arms. But isn't that the point? If you have a bigger microphone, shouldn't you be more careful? Natalie exhales softly, her posture shifting just a bit. Of course. But being careful shouldn't mean staying silent. There's a brief pause at the table. The first host glances at her notes. Let's talk about your recent comments, because they sparked quite a bit of debate online. Some people felt you were dismissive of opposing viewpoints. Natalie's eyebrows lift slightly. Dismissive? Yes, the host continues. There was a quote where you said people who disagree with you are not engaging in good faith. That rubbed a lot of viewers the wrong way. A ripple moves through the audience. This is getting more pointed now. Natalie leans forward slightly. I didn't say everyone who disagrees with me isn't acting in good faith, she clarifies. I was referring to a specific type of conversation, where facts aren't really part of it. But who decides that? Another host interjects quickly. That's where people get uncomfortable. It can come off like you're saying, if you don't agree with me, you're not being rational. Natalie's expression tightens again, just briefly. That's not what I'm saying, she responds. I'm saying that some discussions aren't actually discussions, they're just noise. There's a louder reaction now, some applause, some audible sounds. The second host leans forward. But that's subjective, right? What you call noise, someone else might call their perspective. Sure, Natalie replies, her tone still controlled but firmer now. But if a perspective ignores evidence or reality, then it's not really a perspective, it's misinformation. The audience reacts more strongly this time, some clapping, a few scattered boos. The first host raises her hand slightly, trying to steady things. Okay, let's keep it respectful, everyone. She turns back to Natalie. Do you see how that might sound dismissive, though? Natalie pauses. There's a longer silence this time. I see how it could be interpreted that way, she says slowly. But I think we also have to be honest about the difference between opinion and fact. The second host shakes her head slightly. But who defines that line? Because that's where people feel talked down to. Natalie's jaw tightens just a bit. I don't think acknowledging facts is talking down to anyone. Some viewers feel it is, the host presses. They feel like celebrities, people who live very different lives, are telling them what to think. There's a noticeable shift in the room now. The energy feels heavier. Natalie leans back slightly, her arms resting on the table. I'm not telling anyone what to think, she says. I'm sharing what I think. That's what everyone here is doing, right? There's a quick, almost awkward laugh from one of the hosts. Well, yes, but this is a talk show. It's expected here. And it's not expected elsewhere? Natalie asks, a hint of edge creeping into her voice. The table goes quiet for a split second. The first host jumps in quickly. I think what she's saying is, there's a difference between a conversation space like this and, say, social media, where people don't get to respond in real time. But they do respond, Natalie says, now clearly more engaged. That's all social media is, responses. Not always constructive ones, the second host counters. Agreed, Natalie nods. But that doesn't mean the original conversation shouldn't happen. The audience is more divided now. You can hear it in the scattered applause and murmurs. The first host smiles tightly again. Let's shift gears for a moment, because I don't want this to get too heated. Natalie gives a small, almost ironic smile. I'm okay with heated, she says quietly. That line lands. You can feel it. There's a brief pause, and even the hosts seem to register the change. All right, the first host says, adjusting her posture. Then let's stay with it, but respectfully. Natalie nods. Of course. The second host leans in again. Do you think there's ever a moment where you should just step back? Where it's not your place to speak? Natalie doesn't answer immediately this time. She looks at the table, then back up. I think that question gets asked selectively, she says. Some people are told to step back more than others. The audience reacts again, this time louder. And who do you think gets told that more? The host asks. Natalie's expression shifts, subtle, but noticeable. I think you know the answer to that, she says. And just like that, the tension at the table tightens another notch. The table goes quiet for a second after that last line. You can feel the shift, not explosive yet, but something underneath has clearly changed. The first host clears her throat softly, trying to regain control of the tone. Well, I think our viewers would probably appreciate you saying it directly. A few audience members clap, encouraging it. Natalie looks at her, then briefly out toward the audience. I think women get told that more, she says plainly. And I think people who speak about certain issues get told that more. There's a louder reaction now, applause mixed with a few scattered groans. The second host jumps in quickly. But don't you think that sometimes it's not about gender or identity, but about expertise? Like, people want to hear from experts. Natalie nods. Of course. Experts are essential. But you're not a policy expert, the host presses. So when you speak strongly on certain topics, some people feel like, why should we listen to you over someone who studied this their whole life? Natalie leans forward slightly, her tone still measured but more direct now. I don't think anyone should listen to me over an expert, she says. I think they should listen to experts. And I often amplify experts. Okay, but, the host tries to interject. But, Natalie continues, not raising her voice but clearly holding the floor now, that doesn't mean I shouldn't also express my own views as a citizen. The audience claps, this time more unified. The first host nods, but there's a slight tension in her smile. Right, but when you express those views, they carry influence whether you intend them to or not. Natalie gives a small shrug. So does yours. That lands harder than anything so far. There's a brief pause, and one of the other hosts lets out a quiet, okay, under her breath. The second host leans back slightly, then forward again. But we're here to have conversations, she says. That's literally our job. And I'm here having one, Natalie replies. A ripple of laughter moves through the audience, some supportive, some uneasy. The first host raises her hand slightly. All right, let's not talk over each other. But the tone has shifted. It's no longer light disagreement, it's becoming sharper. The second host looks directly at Natalie now. Do you ever worry that the way you say things shuts people down instead of bringing them in? Natalie pauses again, but this time it's shorter. Yes, she says honestly. I do think about that. The host nods, as if she's about to agree, but Natalie continues. But I also think there's a tendency to focus more on tone than on substance, she adds. There's a mix of reactions, some applause, some audible sighs. What do you mean by that? The first host asks, leaning in. I mean, Natalie says, sometimes people will dismiss what's being said because they don't like how it's being said, instead of actually engaging with the point. The second host shakes her head slightly. Or, she counters, maybe the way something is said matters just as much as the point itself. Of course it matters, Natalie replies quickly. But it shouldn't erase the point entirely. The audience reacts again. This back and forth is clearly pulling them in now. One of the quieter hosts finally jumps in, trying to soften things. I think what people are struggling with is feeling judged, she says. Like, if they don't agree, they're somehow less informed or less thoughtful. Natalie turns toward her, her expression easing just a little. I understand that, she says. I really do. There's a brief moment where it feels like things might de-escalate. But, she adds, disagreement doesn't automatically mean both sides are equally valid. And just like that, the tension snaps back. A louder reaction from the audience, this time more divided than before. The second host immediately leans in. See, that right there, that's what people react to, she says. Because who decides that? Natalie exhales, this time more visibly. We all do, she says. Collectively. Through evidence, through discussion, through. But that sounds ideal, the host cuts in. That's not how it works in real life. People have different lived experiences, different values. Absolutely, Natalie agrees, nodding. And those matter. But facts still exist within that. The first host raises her voice slightly, not aggressive, but firmer. But even facts are debated now. Some things shouldn't be, Natalie says, her tone sharpening just a fraction. There's a noticeable ooh from the audience. The second host leans back, eyebrows raised. And who decides what shouldn't be debated? Natalie holds her gaze. Reality. That line hits. There's a split-second silence, then a wave of reactions, applause, a few boos, a lot of murmuring. The first host quickly steps in. Okay, let's bring this down just a notch. But it's clear now, this isn't a casual segment anymore. The second host shakes her head slightly, a half-smile that doesn't quite hide the tension. You see how that sounds, though, she says. It sounds like you're closing the door on conversation. Natalie's posture stiffens. I'm not closing the door, she says. I'm saying that not every claim deserves equal weight. And that's where people feel dismissed, the host replies immediately. And that's where misinformation spreads, Natalie counters. The audience reacts again, louder now, more emotional. The first host tries again to steer things. Let's take a breath for a second. I am calm, Natalie says, not loudly, but firmly enough that it cuts through. Another small ripple through the audience. I didn't say you weren't, the host replies quickly, a bit defensive now. There's a brief, awkward overlap as both start to speak at once, then stop. The quieter host steps in again. I think what we're seeing here is just how complicated this is, she says carefully. Because people want to feel heard. And I agree with that, Natalie says, turning toward her again. I think everyone deserves to feel heard. Even when they're wrong, the second host asks, almost immediately. That question hangs in the air. Natalie doesn't answer right away this time. She looks at the host, then out toward the audience again. I think people deserve to be listened to, she says slowly. But I don't think every idea deserves to be validated. The reaction is immediate, loud, split, emotional. Some applause, some clear disagreement. The first host leans back slightly, exhaling. All right, we're definitely in it now. There's a nervous laugh from the audience. But Natalie doesn't smile this time. She's still composed, but the patience is starting to wear thin, and everyone at the table can feel it. The first host tries to reset the tone again, but there's a slight strain in her voice now. Okay, let's bring this back a little, she says, glancing between the panel and Natalie Portman. Because I think we're getting into territory where people are talking past each other. Natalie lets out a quiet breath, but she doesn't look away this time. I don't think we are, she says. I think we're actually being very clear. That lands a little harder than expected. The second host leans forward again, clearly not backing off. But clarity isn't the same as openness, she says. And I think what people are reacting to is a lack of openness. Natalie's expression tightens. I'm open to conversation, she says. I'm not open to pretending that all viewpoints carry the same weight when they don't. A louder reaction from the audience, more divided than before. The first host raises her hand slightly. But who decides that in a free society? She asks. Natalie answers immediately this time. We do, but not individually and not emotionally. We do it by looking at evidence. The second host shakes her head. That sounds good in theory, but in reality, people don't agree on what counts as evidence. And that's exactly the problem, Natalie says, her voice firmer now. There's a noticeable shift, less patience, more edge. One of the hosts tries to soften it. I think what she's saying is people feel like they're being labeled or dismissed when they question things. Natalie turns to her, and for a moment her tone softens, but only slightly. Questioning things is important, she says. But there's a difference between questioning and rejecting without understanding. The audience reacts again, some clapping, others clearly disagreeing. The second host doesn't let it go. But you keep drawing that line, she says. And people don't trust who's drawing it. That's the moment something shifts more noticeably. Natalie leans back, then forward again, her composure still there, but thinner now. I'm not asking anyone to trust me, she says. I'm asking people to think critically. And what if they are? The host fires back. And they just don't come to the same conclusions as you? A pause. Natalie looks directly at her. Then we should be able to examine why, she says. But that requires honesty on both sides. There's a beat of silence. Then the second host gives a small, sharp smile. And you're sure you're bringing that same honesty? That question hits differently. The audience reacts immediately. Oh, a mix of surprise and tension. Natalie's face changes, just slightly, but enough. I try to, she says, more clipped now. Do you? That draws a louder reaction. Some applause, some gasps. The first host quickly jumps in. All right, okay, let's not make this personal. I'm not making it personal, Natalie says, but there's a clear edge now. I'm responding to what's being asked. But it is getting personal, the second host pushes back. Because now it sounds like you're questioning my honesty. I'm responding to your question, Natalie repeats, more firmly. The room feels tighter now, less like a discussion, more like a standoff. The quieter host tries again. I think everyone here is trying to have a real conversation. I am having a real conversation, Natalie says, cutting in slightly, not loudly, but enough to interrupt. Another ripple through the audience. The first host exhales, looking between them. Okay, we're going to take a quick pause in a second, she says, clearly trying to regain control. But the moment has already shifted. Natalie sits back, her expression composed, but the patience is clearly wearing thin now, and the tension at the table is no longer subtle. There's a brief pause as the first host forces a smile toward the camera. All right, we're going to take a quick break, she says, her tone noticeably tighter than at the start. We'll be right back. The music cue hits a second too late, and for a split moment, the microphones are still live. The second host leans back in her chair, shaking her head slightly. That got intense, she mutters, not quite under her breath. Natalie Portman doesn't respond immediately. She adjusts her posture, looking down at the table, then briefly toward the audience. A few people clap softly, supportive, but unsure. When the show returns from break, the energy is different. It's quieter, more controlled. Welcome back, the first host says, smiling again, but this time it doesn't quite reach her eyes. We're here with Natalie Portman. That was a passionate conversation. A small, nervous laugh from the audience. Natalie nods slightly. I think these conversations matter, she says, her tone calmer again, but more guarded now. Even when they're uncomfortable. The second host gives a short nod. I agree with that, she says. I just think people want to feel like they're part of the conversation, not being talked at. Natalie looks at her, then gives a small nod. That's fair, she says. And I'll take that. It's not an apology, but it's the closest thing to a reset. The first host quickly moves things along. All right, we're going to shift gears, she says. We appreciate you being here. The audience claps, this time more unified, relieved. The segment ends without going back into the tension, but the mood lingers. By the time the episode finishes airing, clips of the exchange are already spreading online. Short segments, out-of-context quotes, reactions, everything moves fast. Some viewers praise Natalie for standing her ground. Others criticize her for being dismissive or condescending. The hosts get pulled into it too. Some people say they pushed too hard, others say they didn't push enough. Within hours, social media is split. One clip in particular, I'm not open to pretending all viewpoints carry the same weight, starts trending, with thousands of comments underneath it. Backstage, reports say the conversation after the segment was polite, but distant. No big confrontation, no dramatic fallout, but no easy laughter either. Just professionalism. And that's usually how these moments end, not with explosions, but with quiet distance. Still, the impact lingers. It becomes one of those talk show moments people keep replaying, analyzing, debating. And now it's your turn. What did you think? Was Natalie right to stand firm, or did she cross a line? Share your opinion in the comments and subscribe to Final Take Files for more real talk show stories.